Hi guys! Today marks a huge momentous occasion for humanity. This week marks the 54th anniversary of the first man on the moon.
Before this decade is out, of landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to the earth.
What an incredible achievement in all of humanity. So I decided to make this video in terms of celebration. So the moon has played a huge role in all cultures and civilizations around the globe. And that's probably because we can see it with our naked eye. But I think it's really interesting to think about how the moon has changed in our view and in fiction over time. So I really think it's interesting to remember what it was like in those early days before we ever went to the moon. The moon was this incredible, untouchable thing. It was this thing that linked all humanity together. Two people could look at the moon across the world and feel linked in some way, knowing that some person that you would never meet in a different culture is looking at the moon at the same time. In science fiction, the moon has sparked imagination since the beginning. The days of H.G. Wells and Jules Verne. It has inspired generations of science fiction writers and has been often demonstrated to be an entity of limitless possibility. It holds everything from alien species to the answers to understanding everything about the universe. What a fun time in literature to read about the moon. But the moon really evolved in science fiction when Neil Armstrong put down that first boot print in the dust. I mean, it became achievable. The moon became a blank slate, an alternative place for humanity to start fresh, to have and reinvent politics, social norms, and society, and learn from our past mistakes, to try things that haven't been done or functional in society today. It also became a place where we can use it as a stepping stone or a practice ground to invent technology to allow us to expand and habitate even inhospitable worlds across the solar system and galaxy. And these ideas have been very prevalent throughout all of science fiction and continue even today. But at some point, the moon wasn't always this amazingly positive potential place. At some point, science fiction had a turn, and a lot of authors began showing the moon as this looming threat to civilization. It became the cause of an unsurvivable planetary apocalypse as it breaks into pieces or explodes or becomes even a secret alien piece of technology and destroys the planet. And it's not just in these disaster novels that this negative view is found. It's also a popular destination for these murder mystery sci-fi thrillers where it's featuring some kind of unknown horror that is discovered that's going to destroy the planet, or it's going to feature some kind of forbidden knowledge that we were better off not knowing. And it is a very popular place for science fiction horror. And I think it's really cool to consider all the different ways that the moon is represented in science fiction. There's a really cool juxtaposition and contrast and themes of the hope and the potential and possibility around the space race, around the lunar landing. And then eventually, as we go through time, we start to see it become a little bit of a looming threat and something that is a scary potential in our solar system and in our society. And of course, there is plenty of in between. The moon has a lot of books that are taking place as satires, and of course there's going to be sci-fantasy zombie thrillers, and there's all kinds of literature in between. I've decided to go ahead and curate a list of lunar fiction, including as many different kinds of science fiction books that take place not just specifically on the moon, but have the moon as the major plot point in the novels. So I tried to give you a variety in this, so let's get to the books. The first book that I want to talk about is the classic Robert Heinlein novel, The Moon is a Harsh Mistress. This book is definitely set in an established moon colony. Our main character really introduces us to a new way of politics, a new way of social norms with polygamy and other social political views that are very, very interesting in this book. The main character basically forms a rebel friend group around himself, realizes that the moon is definitely a slave to Earth, and decides to go ahead and orchestrate a coup and free the moon from Earth's bondage. This is done in a really creative and clever way. It's a very easily accessible novel. I love Heinlein's writing style, specifically in this book, and my very favorite character is his sentient AI best friend. There's so many fun quips in here, and I love that the AI is trying to invent or understand humor, so it makes it really fun for me. I really, really enjoyed this novel. I would recommend this particular book for even those people who don't like Heinlein's politics. I feel like it's really easy to ignore in parts of this, and there's a lot of things that you can discuss in this book. So if you haven't picked this one up, I would recommend. The next one on this list is going to be a book that I've talked about before, and that is Ian McDonald's Lunar trilogy. This one starts with New Moon, and this is essentially Game of Thrones, but it's on the moon. So this follows one of the ruling families of the moon that owns one of the big energy corporations, which of course you're dependent on if you live on the moon. So they are about to have the head of the family step down and retire and give the power and the reins to a new family member, which is the most vulnerable time in transition of power. So all the other powerful families on the moon are vying for that power. Now this book really has a lot of unlikable characters, especially in the beginning, and it took a little while for me to get used to this book, but what really saved this novel for me was the two point of view perspectives. And we have flashbacks of the head of the family and what happened and how she created this founding company, how they rose to power, and that for me was really what made me fall in love with her character, her family, and what made me in the end really care about the fate of her family. If you are really into politics and vying for power, if you liked Game of Thrones, although there's no dragons in this one, this might be a book series for you. Just know that it's very dry at the beginning. The next book on this list is Inherit the Stars by James Hogan. This is a vintage science fiction novel from the 1970s, right after the lunar landing. That is one of those books where it imagines how the moon holds all of the answers to understanding the universe. This book was written with such hope, and it was such a fun, surprising novel. I gotta say, I think it's my favorite of the books on this list because I just wasn't expecting it. This one hosts, as you can see in the picture, where we find a dead astronaut's body on the moon, but we're not missing anyone. And as we do more testing to try to find out who this is, we find out that the body is over 50,000 years old, which is insane. They also find that the technology on the body is a little bit more advanced than the technology we have today. The science of exploring how this happened and how we figured out each individual piece from the different areas on the body and how they discover where the body is from was incredible. It was just such a fun journey. I would definitely call this a hard science fiction novel because they really go into how they dated things and how things were done. But the discoveries in this book were so incredibly fun. It changed the way that we understand the moon, ourselves, and our solar system. And this book was an incredible read. I highly recommend that you check this out or you look for it in one of your used bookstores. This is a first in a series, and I have not yet picked up the rest of the series, but I will tell you that I 100% plan to. If you want just a single one and done kind of a book, you can be satisfied with the end of this book. If you are a big fan of Rendezvous with Rama, this book has that feel, that vibe, that taste. So I definitely recommend this book if you were a fan of that. The next book on this list is one that I don't have a physical copy of. It's called Growing Up Weightless by John Ford. This is a book that I would have not encountered if it hadn't been for the Tour Essentials books. I definitely randomly picked it up on a whim. This is a more intimate book that really focuses on just two characters. It is a coming-of-age tale of Matthias, who has grown up on the moon. And in this society, when you turn 13, you get to pick your job for life. And of course, he doesn't know really what he wants to do. So he's getting all these job offers and he's trying to decide, and he's having fun with his friends in one last hurrah. Of course, this perspective is contrasted by point of view perspective chapters by his father, Albin. And his father is already in a job and he works in Lunar water, and he is trying to do what's right in an essentially selfish and greedy culture that is humanity. I found what made this book a little bit more interesting than other books I had read is the contrasting view between the kind of selfish coming of age potential of the 13-year-old son with the mature but still somehow nuanced and somehow similar views of his father in a more advanced but somehow similar perspective in this story. This is very much a slow burn. There's not a whole lot of action that happens in this novel, and the climax is only slightly elevated from the rest of the book, so it's not going to be for everyone. But if you're looking for that more intimate slice of life, what is he really saying about the world, this is a book that might be for you. Now, let's contrast that with the exact opposite. The next book on our list is Artemis by Andy Weir. So this is very much a book about action. It's not as much about a statement about the world, and it's really not even about politics, although there are some really interesting political nuances like sprinkled throughout this book. This book follows Jasmine, a 26-year-old smuggler who lives on the moon colony and can get you what you want on the moon, even if it's illegal.
I'm a bootlegger!
She accidentally gets entangled in a plot of grab for power and the powers that be, and all of the disasters that follow. Of course, that means that the moon colony is in threat, and not only does she have to survive, but she also has to try to save the people on this colony. I thought that despite the fact that this book is getting negative reviews and people are mad that it's not The Martian or Project Hail Mary, this book was awesome. I don't know why people are upset about it. Maybe I don't know enough about Middle Eastern culture, since jazz is technically Middle Eastern. If you're curious about it and if you want something that is a thriller, edge-of-your-seat survival novel, this one definitely occurs on the moon and is a really fun read. Next on the list is this hecka-chunker. We gotta talk about Neal Stephenson's Seven Eves. This is a one-and-done thriller. It has one of the best first lines, maybe of all time, which I want to read for you right now. The moon blew up without warning, and for no apparent reason. Best first line of any book. How can you not want to read this book after that? So what's really intriguing about this novel is that it is divided into three parts. The first two parts are humanity dealing with everything about that first line. We know that the moon has blown up and it's going to fall into the planet and cause an apocalypse. So we want humanity as a species to live. Neal Stephenson has done quite a lot of research, and he is very info-dumpy. He really deals with a lot of the science and the math and everything that's involved in how would we actually survive realistically as a species if this was happening. I thought he did a fantastic job. There's a lot of astrophysics and mathematics that are info-dumped, but what was really interesting to me is, while I'm not an astrophysicist and I tend to get bored with too much math, I really liked this book because it gave me a flavor and a tone of the characters diving into all of these itty-bitty details of how we survive as a way of emotional coping with what is happening and their possible destruction in the future. I really loved part 1 and part 2 of this book. The third part is what will make or break this book for you. The third part is very controversial, and it occurs in the future as he projects out into what happens to humanity. It was definitely the reason for the title. It was definitely a really intriguing idea. It's only going to leave you with two feels. Either you're going to be left wanting more and thinking it's a really interesting thought experiment, or you're absolutely gonna hate it and throw the book across the room. There's really no in-between, or at least I haven't heard of any. So if you had an in-between meh version of it, please let me know in the comments down below. I have an interesting commentary about this book, and that is, if he had taken part 3 of this book and put it at the beginning and made it part 1, and then told us how it happened by going back to the beginning and then making that first part be towards the ends of the book, I think a lot of people would be a lot more happy with this book. I am definitely in the camp of recommending this book. I feel like there's tons of discussion to be had. He brings up a whole lot of possibility and a whole lot of really interesting ideas, and I'm definitely a big ideas kind of gal. So I really liked this one. I really thought it was worth a read, and it is accessible for people who are in intermediate to advanced science fiction. So if you're interested and some info dumps don't bother you, definitely check out this book. Next on the list is a book called The Dark Side by Anthony O'Neill. This is a science fiction, murder mystery, noir thriller on the moon. There are tons of these books out there, and the reason why I picked this one is because I feel like they did the murder mystery noir part right. We have a very moral police detective who happened to do the right thing but gets punished for it by being exiled to the moon, where there is a city named Purgatory that is a gangster-run city. All the seedy underbelly of the earth gets sort of exiled to this city. We have our moralistic detective who arrives just in time for a string of murders that is being completed by a very mysterious android. And we watch as this moralistic detective has to navigate the politics and all of these gangster underbelly. I mean, everyone is essentially a suspect because everybody has a history in this town, and yet he is trying to solve these murders and figure out why it's happened. I really enjoyed this book in terms of a beach read. I really enjoyed it, but this isn't going to blow your mind. It's not going to change your life. It was just a really fun murder mystery. I thought it was done right. Another book that I have to mention is a book called Dead Moon by Peter Clines. I'm including this book so that way I can be complete. This book is, I think, rather a mediocre book, but it is the only book that I have read that includes a zombie outbreak on the moon for a possible legitimate reason. This book was nothing special. I felt like it was an easy beach read. If you want to shut off your brain and you just want a whole bunch of action, this is the book for you, but it's not necessarily the best zombie novel I've ever read. It doesn't make a whole lot of statements about society. It was just kind of an easy, fun, candy read. The last book on this list that I'm going to include is kind of cheating, kind of not. It is Steel Beach by John Varley. This novel is allegedly somewhere in a series, but I want you to know I wasn't confused. It was easy for me to pick up, and it's an easy one and done. This book somehow straddles a mystery novel with a thriller and a dystopia all at the same time. It's also a little bit of a satirical parody, very a light-hearted style, but covers a lot of really deep themes. I have so much to say about this novel. It really makes me rethink everything, and it was really deep, fun read that sticks with me. So this book follows Hildy, who is a journalist, and he kind of uses this character to introduce us to a new society on the moon that's controlled by AI. We have life-extending technology, and gender doesn't really matter as all of the characters change gender whenever they feel like in this society. I think that this book is kind of explained in terms of the title. They have some quote in here that says, "Life always persists. If you take a fish and throw it on a steel beach, it will learn to grow legs and become amphibious." They're using that as a expletive to explain that aliens have, before this book starts, come to planet Earth and kicked humanity off of Earth, and now we are forced to live on the moon. That is not really explored in this novel. I guess it's explored in some of his other sci-fi series or the books in this series. There were a lot of deep topics in this book, especially because at the very beginning, Hildy, which is our main character, does attempt to commit suicide on a whim and doesn't really know why. Of course, spoilers, he lives through the first chapter, so really what we discover is that all of humanity seems very depressed and we're not really sure why. Eventually we discover that even the controlling AI central computer is feeling very depressed about everything. And that is where the mystery of this novel takes place. Where does this depression come from? What is really the root cause of it? And how are we going to deal with those kinds of problems? It was a shockingly deep, very interesting book that all took place on the moon and had a very satirical, very light-hearted style of dealing with a lot of these really incredible, deeper themes. I really thought that there was a lot to unpack here, and I would highly recommend this book. So that does it for some lunar fiction picks. This is by no means an exhaustive list. Please let me know in the comments down below if you have any other moon-based science fiction novels that you think were topics that weren't covered here. Let me know what your favorite way to view the moon is, and come talk to us in Discord. Until next time, you guys, be sure to check out some of those other videos in the cards below.